Why don't I get your thoughts first up about that opening gambit? I want to start with you, Catherine. Your thoughts on the coverage and this overweening attempt from day one, really, to say that the reason we've had bad bushfires was climate change.
Well, I left Twitter last year, and you've just refreshed me on all the reasons that I did, Chris. What a sewer. And I'm stunned, actually. I thought all those people hurling invective at the PM were now living in New Zealand. I recall most of that crew on the morning of Saturday, May the 18th, tweeting enthusiastically from the local state school about their democracy sandwich, and then by 9:30 PM they're on their way to New Zealand, I thought. So I didn't know they would have been directly impacted by the bushfires. But the point you made, I think we exchanged texts on the weekend, that use of unprecedented was exceptionally dishonest and framed this as a catastrophe that was almost without exception or without explanation. And when you looked at, as you did, at the history of catastrophic bushfires right back to 1850, which are probably the earliest best recorded ones, it's hardly unprecedented at all. And indeed, the Black Saturday, only a decade ago, produced vastly more fatalities. Certainly, this has been a shocking summer. And I caveat what I'm about to say also with the fact that we forget when you're doing these exchanges on Twitter that we're talking about a human being. And in the case of the Prime Minister, a human being who lost his beloved father last week. And we saw Twitter at its worst with a young man driven to suicide in the last month at the invective hurled at him. Takes a pretty special bloke, I would have thought, to have kept fronting up as the PM has done, and doubling up, frankly. And some of that stuff that you just refreshed my memory on was quite putrid. But Joe Hildebrand got it right. What this was the DRS review from the press gallery and others on the May 18 result, when in fact there's a general consensus among the major parties about some form of reductions. There are targets. We're a signatory to the Paris Agreement under both parties, and there was an argument in May about the degree of that, and the government won that argument. And there are a lot of people now queuing up to put the slipper in and revisit that decision.
Yeah, it's a bit like the resistance in the US. Now, Rebecca, the Twitter is one thing, but the mainstream media coverage has been so biased as well. It has been a tragic summer. Why the need to exaggerate it? And is it disturbing to see so many in the media just go along for that ride, the groupthink?
Well, I think I have the impression that for a lot of people, they are actually incapable of separating these two things out. I thought it was very telling, you know, when a journalist like Latika Burke says, these are the worst fires in living memory. This is a generation, but also a period in our history when nobody wants to actually remember history. Nobody wants to look back, even 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30, 50 years ago, which is, you know, or 100 years ago, and certainly we have centenarians living amongst us. So I think that a lot of people simply want to hop on the bandwagon, and we saw this was a global phenomenon. It was quite extraordinary. The people all around the world who were engaged with what was going on in Australia, which of course, sadly, we are used to. Or, you know, we have to go through not bushfire crises, but bushfires. Bushfires, you know, this endless appending the word crisis or event. You know, it was a hail event. You know, it wasn't just hail. You know, as if that somehow makes it worse. But I think for a lot of these people, they are so used to it, that's all they hear, they live in a bubble, and they do conflate a bushfire with climate change.
And Morris, it seemed, especially in the international coverage, but I suppose even in this domestic coverage with the political edge, they were wanting to use Australia and Australia's bushfires as sort of exhibit A for their climate change argument. We were just a convenient foil.
Yeah, I think that it's a more serious issue than just trying to conflate. There is a very real move these days with the Extinction Rebellion and all of these movements to draw every single catastrophic event to climate change. Now, we've been having, since, as you pointed out in your piece this morning, we've been having droughts and bushfires since time began. Now, in fact, between 1900 and 1970, we had more droughts and they were more severe than we've had since then. But putting that to one side, all these people who are predicting global warming and the fact that we're going to have worse droughts, what were they doing in the interim between the last fire that we had in King Lake and before that? I mean, in 1939, we had a Royal Commission. We've had 57 inquiries since then. What has happened? And this, to me, is just backside covering by the Greens to say, well, it's really all climate change and has nothing to do with us, even though we've been saying it's going to get hotter, but we can't do anything on the forest floor.
When it comes to either fuel reduction on the forest floor or planning requirements or keeping housing away from bushland, we have got worse and worse and worse.
Done nothing.
Rather than learn the lessons of not 1939, let alone 2009.